At home, he stood with his back against the wall, side by side with an old mirror. Was the fear irrational, or just the opposite? Well, it didn't matter. There was work to be done on securing the field. He had no time to spend worrying about himself. It wasn't dirt. He knew that much as soon as he tried to wipe off the dark marks that appeared under his chin and on his neck. They were reminiscent of bruises of some kind, very intense, dark bruises, like the ones you would get around your lips when you placed a tiny ball over them and sucked on it for as long as you needed to calm down. Oh, an awful habit, son. Please stop doing this. These discolorations could be anything and nothing. And for now, Nevene chose the latter. He washed up, changed his shirt for a turtleneck, and headed back out to work on the fence. He wasn't sure how he was meant to be enjoying this new world in life. He was trying, but every day that passed, it felt like he was letting Viveka down. Another pole found its place in the ground. Nevene prodded it to make sure it was stable enough. In the fading light of the setting sun, he could no longer rely on his eyes alone to tell him the truth, especially on this side where the ground was obscured by Field's own shadow. He grabbed the wire and knelt down to tie the new pole to the rest of the fence. As his eyes leveled with the white surface of the field, he noticed something off in the distance. Right above the flowers formed a dark, mist-like cloud. Fungus spores? Viveka had taught Nevene how to care for the flowers, which plants could invade the area and needed to be pruned, but she'd never mentioned anything capable of exuding spores. With a groan, Nevene braced himself on the fence poles and pulled himself up despite the protests of his tired muscles. The cloud was barely visible from above, but it was definitely still there. As the colony moved back to the surface, they began to reintroduce a few chosen plant species from the homeland. According to careful research and the pre-malfunction experiences, they were capable of peaceful coexistence with the local flora, and the additional fertilization they required had no effect on resident plants. Yet that didn't mean it would have no effect on Viveka's flowers. After all, sometimes it only took one little thing joining the ecosystem for everything to fall into chaos. The countless cautionary stories with ecological themes echoed in Nevene's head. Whether they spun a tale of a fantasy forest dying as desperate dryads tried to save it, or a science fiction fable following a trail of dead planets left in humanity's wake, they all strived to put forth the same message. Whatever humans touch inevitably dies. And though the intent behind these tales was to teach to do better, Nevene was beginning to feel it was moot. The cycle of destruction was a cycle, and as most others, it liked to repeat itself. It didn't matter if people went in guns blazing to scorch and conquest, or if they tried to merely survive by shaping the world around them, not depleting it. In the end, ruin all the same. Simply postponed. The one thing they could fight for was the time they needed to escape and begin the cycle anew elsewhere. The cloud wasn't moving much, definitely hovering over one specific spot deep into the field, making it unlikely to be a cluster of tiny insects. And coming up close confirmed it. The brownish mist was composed of minuscule particles, indiscernible to a naked eye. Nevene dived down to examine the ground. The light was scarce, but even moving his fingers over the ground yielded nothing. No foreign plant took root there that could be causing this, no animal made home. He made sure to check all the nearby stems as well to exclude the possibility of a parasitic growth or infestation, but there was truly nothing out of the ordinary here. Only the cloud. An anomaly. Perhaps it would be gone by tomorrow. The colony, on the other hand, would not. He had to secure the field from his fellow humans first. Home again, then. Temporary threatened to remind Nevene of the worry that chased him out of here the last time. But for now it remained translucent and distant, much like the people who used to live here. He made his way to the one warehouse area that kept its designated role after the exodus. The rooms were huge. Had it not been for the toxicity of the surrounding soil, the people would have likely left them as excavated, reinforced caves, not bothering with the hundreds of metal sheets lining the walls, the ceiling, the floors. It was the third room which held most of the usable equipment. Initially, every single shelf around here had been meticulously stocked and labeled, but once most other areas had to be repurposed, it was as if the Hell's Demons unleashed their fury upon the warehouses. The shelves weren't stocked anymore, they were stacked with things sticking out of them every which way. Mangled, squeezed boxes, dangling cables, stuff dangling on set cables, and the lights were out of order to boot. Nevene raised his flashlight. He had to hope the dim glow would be enough to help him navigate this dump. Using the remnants of the cataloging system that the colonists had tried to somewhat preserve, he actually managed to find a section with usable cameras in reasonable time. Surely not all of them would work, but some had to. In his mind, he was already planning out the structure he could raise around the field to support them and allow him to expand upon the monitoring system. It would be a lot of work, but it had to be done. Carrying boxfuls of potential junk upstairs was an idea dead on arrival. So instead, Nevene made room on one of the shelves and placed his big flashlight on top of it. Few short trips to the camera cluster, grabbing whatever seemed useful on the way, and he had a small pile of various equipment to check. He reached for one of the cameras, but as his hand entered the beam of light, he froze. The discolorations spread here, too. From the webbings of his fingers, they followed up towards the nails. He turned the shaking hand around and revealed more spots sprawling over his palm. They had not been there this morning. He had washed his hands. He had looked at them. They'd been clean. Were the splotches here before he walked into the temporary? When had they appeared? Why? Stop! He grabbed his hand with the other one, now also covered in the dark red splotches. Stop shaking! Near the entrance to the room, he had seen a few pairs of gloves. He went to grab them and promptly put them on. He had to pick out the working cameras to protect the field, and the discolorations would be distracting. Sleep doesn't come easy this night, and when it finally does come, it leaves quickly. Nevene tosses and turns, fighting for those few winks to get enough energy for tomorrow. His body still aches from the work on the fence and digging through the warehouse, but it's the heat that's really making it difficult. The turtleneck shirt is too thick for the current temperature, and it's still nothing compared to the gloves. Something about having his hands gloved at night is unbearable. But come morning, he's glad he kept them on. In the bathroom, he simply lets the water and soap seep through the fabric. It feels good on his skin, and it works well enough too. He goes back to the field carrying a box full of measuring tools. The surveillance system can't be winged as easily as the primitive fence. He's focused, and the mindset calms him down, steadies his hands, quickens his step. The task feels achievable, the purpose clear and sensible. Then all of it evaporates. There is no more need to kneel by the field to see the cloud floating over it. Today it rises higher, hovering proudly in the morning sun. Yet it's not even that which makes Nevene drop the box and rush forward. No, it's that this spore cloud is not the same one he'd seen before. And it's not the only one present anymore. 5, 6, don't count. He runs to the nearest one and barely stops himself from trampling the flowers in his panicked dash. He needs to ask again where these spores come from. He must solve the riddle. But there is no riddle anymore. There is no mystery. The answer becomes obvious in an instant. In the center of the cloud grows a flower, its crown surrounded by darker, slithering strings of spore mist. They originate between the flower's white petals and flow out into the air. Nevinna doesn't think as he grabs the flower by the stem and tears it out of the ground. It is the very act that terrified him just moments ago when it was the colonists who meant to commit it. It is what drove him to build the fence and everything that was meant to follow. It is why his body aches and why he forgot about his quest to discover his own roots and purpose. He stands there, paralyzed by both the fear and the dawning realization of his own deed. Yet even that horror pales in the face of his next discovery. The stem of the blighted flower is covered in discolored splotches, dark red. And of course the thought crosses Nevinna's mind. He barely manages to shove it back before his brain can spell it out and make it undeniable. He hides the flower behind his back. But it's still there, of course, its roots hanging helplessly in the air, shaking off the remaining soil with each tap from the surrounding plants. Not right. The single thing, the only thing Nevinna can do is hurry to his mother's laboratory and search for answers. Take this one flower and use it to save the others. That makes sense. It's a good idea. It's a sound decision. He doesn't need anything more. He doesn't need to look down at the other stems. He doesn't. But he can't stop himself. There are no gloves to obscure them. The blight marks spread over the flowers that grew near the one he now holds. Nevinna flees. It's only right as he reaches the shack leading to the Eka log that he stops. 1 second of courage is all he needs, and he rips off one of his gloves. He lays the flower on his palm and compares the discolorations. They're the same. Of course they are the same. This is the moment he realizes something he can't quite explain. He wants to live. At least he thinks so, because the idea of dying puts the fear of forgotten gods into him.